At her mother's funeral, while rain fell and prayers ended, a man whispered 3 words that destroyed everything: "I want a divorce." She was pregnant, alone, broken. What he didn't know was that the woman he abandoned that day had just inherited $500 million. And this is the story of how silence became her greatest revenge. Rain fell slowly, not in heavy drops, but in a quiet, endless drizzle, the kind that soaks into clothes, skin, and bones without making a sound. It felt as though even the sky had chosen to grieve in silence. The cemetery lay wrapped in a gray mist. Tall trees stood motionless, their leaves heavy with rain, as if bowing their heads in respect. The air smelled of wet soil and freshly cut grass, a scent that lingered painfully in the lungs. A long row of black umbrellas moved slowly, opening and closing with soft clicks, each sound echoing louder in the stillness than it should have. At the center of it all stood a wooden coffin. Simple, polished, final. It rested beside an open grave, the dark earth beneath it waiting patiently. A priest murmured prayers in a low, steady voice, but the words felt distant, blurred by the weight of grief hanging in the air. This was meant to be a moment of unity, a moment where families stood together, where pain was shared, where silence itself felt comforting. But for Ananya, it was the day her entire world truly collapsed. She stood near the grave, her body frozen, as though moving even an inch would shatter what little strength she had left. One hand rested instinctively on her slightly pregnant belly, her fingers trembling beneath the thin black fabric of her dress. The other hand clutched a framed photograph of her mother so tightly that her knuckles had turned white. Her eyes were swollen, red from nights without sleep. Dark circles clung to her face, making her look older than her 28 years. Her lips were dry, her breath uneven. She had lost her mother just 3 days ago, her anchor, her protector, the only person who had loved her without conditions, without expectations. Her mother had been her home. And now that home was being lowered into the ground, Ananya's mind replayed memories she wasn't ready to let go of: her mother's soft voice, the warmth of her embrace, the way she always knew what to say when the world felt cruel. Just a week ago, her mother had held her face gently and whispered, "Be strong, my child. Life will test you." Ananya hadn't known how soon that test would come. Standing beside her was the man who was supposed to hold her up during moments like this. But he didn't. Raghav, her husband of 6 years, stood slightly apart. His posture was stiff, impatient. He checked his watch, once, then again, as though this burial was nothing more than a meeting that had gone on too long. His tailored black suit was spotless, untouched by rain or emotion. Not a single wrinkle, not a single tear. His face was calm, cold, detached. Ananya glanced at him, searching desperately for even a hint of comfort. A hand on her shoulder, a whispered reassurance, anything. There was nothing. Raghav didn't look at the coffin. He didn't bow his head. He didn't close his eyes in prayer. It was as if he were waiting for it all to end. The priest's voice finally reached the final prayer. The sound of soil hitting wood echoed through the cemetery, a hollow, painful thud that made Ananya's chest tighten. Her knees nearly gave way. People began to move. Soft murmurs of condolences filled the air. "I'm sorry for your loss. She was a good woman. Be strong." Faces blurred together. Voices faded in and out. Just as Ananya thought the worst was over, Raghav leaned closer. His voice was low, sharp, impatient, completely out of place in a moment like this. "This is enough drama," he whispered. "We need to talk, now." The words hit her harder than the rain. Ananya turned toward him slowly, disbelief written across her face. Her heart pounded violently against her ribs. "Raghav," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Please, not today." Her eyes begged him. Her body shook. She was broken, raw, barely standing. But he didn't care. Right there, at her mother's burial. "I want a divorce," he said flatly, as if announcing a business decision. "I'm done with this marriage." Time stopped. The rain seemed to freeze midair. The sound of footsteps faded. Even the wind felt like it had paused. Ananya stared at him, unable to breathe. Divorce. Here, now. People continued walking away, unaware that something else had just died in that cemetery. Not a body, but a bond. A second funeral was taking place. The death of Ananya's marriage. Her lips trembled as she struggled to find her voice. Tears streamed down her face, mixing with rain. "I'm pregnant," she whispered, her hand tightening protectively over her belly. "This is your child." For a brief second, she hoped. Hoped he would pause. Hoped he would feel something. Hoped he would remember who he once was. Raghav laughed. Not loudly, not openly. A soft, cruel laugh, the kind that cuts deeper than shouting ever could. "I know," he replied calmly. "And I don't want it." The words crushed her. He straightened his suit, turned on his heel, and walked away without another glance. His shoes sank slightly into the wet soil, but he didn't slow down. He didn't look back. Ananya stood frozen, alone, beside two graves, one holding her mother, one holding everything she believed her life was meant to be. Her knees finally gave out, and she collapsed to the ground, the photograph slipping from her fingers and landing in the mud. The rain continued to fall, washing over her silent sobs. What Raghav didn't know, what no one there could have imagined, was that the woman he had just abandoned, grieving, pregnant, broken, had unknowingly just become the sole heir to a $500 million inheritance. And that moment, that exact moment at the grave, would one day return to haunt him. Ananya hadn't always been weak. There was a time when her laughter filled rooms, when her opinions carried confidence, and when her future felt like something she could shape with her own hands. She had been ambitious, not loudly, not arrogantly, but quietly determined. She studied hard, dreamed deeply, and believed that kindness and intelligence could build a meaningful life. People used to admire her strength. That version of Ananya slowly faded after she married Raghav. At first, it didn't happen all at once. It never does. The change was subtle, a comment here, a correction there, a suggestion framed as concern. Over time, those small moments stacked on top of each other until the woman Ananya once was felt like a distant memory. Raghav came from a powerful business family, the kind of family whose name opened doors without knocking. Wealth followed them like a shadow. Respect was expected, not earned. And ruthlessness was considered a virtue. To Raghav, life was a transaction. People were assets, relationships were investments, and emotions were weaknesses. Ananya's mother, Meera, never fit into that world. She was quiet, reserved, graceful in a way that didn't seek attention. She lived modestly, wore simple clothes, and never spoke about her past. There was something dignified about her silence, something deliberate. Raghav mistook that silence for insignificance. "She's just a schoolteacher," he would say dismissively, often in front of others. No status, no connections. The words stung, but Ananya swallowed them. "She raised me alone," Ananya would reply. Softly, "She values simplicity." Raghav would scoff. "Simplicity is just another word for limitation." Ananya chose not to argue. She believed love could soften him. That patience could heal arrogance. That marriage meant growing together. She was wrong. Love didn't change Raghav. Money did. When Raghav's business was thriving, he was charming, attentive, generous. He spoke of the future with confidence, promised vacations, a bigger house, a better life. But success is a mask. And when his business began to fail, the mask fell. At first, it was stress, long nights, irritation, short temper. Then it became anger. The charm vanished. The patience died. The respect disappeared. "You bring nothing to this house," he would shout during arguments, his voice echoing through the walls. "No money, no influence, no use." Ananya would stand silently, her hands clenched, trying not to cry. Then he started including her mother. "Your mother brings nothing either," he would sneer. "A useless past, a useless present." Those words hurt more than anything he had ever said to her. And when Ananya told him she was pregnant, hoping it would bring them closer, his reaction was cold. "And now you're pregnant," he snapped. "Perfect timing to ruin my life." The joy she had imagined evaporated instantly. The house grew heavy with silence. Conversations stopped. Meals were eaten separately. Raghav began coming home late, sometimes not at all. Then Meera fell sick. It started as a mild illness, something everyone assumed would pass. But it didn't. Her condition worsened rapidly, and hospital visits became frequent. Ananya begged Raghav for help. "Please," she said one night, holding medical reports in shaking hands. "She needs treatment. I can't do this alone." Raghav barely glanced at the papers. "Hospital bills are not my problem," he replied flatly. The words felt unreal. Ananya didn't argue. She didn't scream. She simply nodded and walked away, her heart breaking quietly. From that moment on, she carried everything alone. She spent nights sleeping on hospital corridor chairs, her back aching, her eyes burning from exhaustion. She held her mother's hand during procedures, whispered prayers during surgeries, and smiled through tears so Meera wouldn't feel guilty. To pay the bills, Ananya sold her jewelry, one piece at a time. Her wedding bangles, a necklace gifted by her mother, earrings she had saved for years. She never told Raghav. During this time, he grew distant. He stopped asking where she was, stopped answering her calls, stopped pretending to care. He began talking about starting fresh. "A clean break," he said casually one evening. "New beginnings." Ananya felt a chill run through her body. She knew what he meant. And then her mother died. Just like that, the woman who had held her together through everything was gone. And in that moment of vulnerability, of grief so deep she could barely breathe, Raghav saw his opportunity. To him, Ananya was no longer a wife. She was a burden, a pregnant woman, with no family, no support, no money. He believed he was cutting ties with poverty, walking away from responsibility, freeing himself from what he considered dead weight. What he didn't realize was that the woman he abandoned had been raised by someone who had chosen silence over power. And that silence had hidden a fortune worth $500 million. By leaving Ananya at her lowest, Raghav thought he was escaping failure. In reality, he was walking away from the greatest loss of his life. 3 days passed after the funeral, but time did not heal anything. For Ananya, each morning felt heavier than the last. The apartment was too quiet, no hospital machines, no visitors, no mother's soft coughing from the next room. Just silence, thick, suffocating silence. She barely ate, barely slept. Her body moved on instinct alone. Wake up, sit by the window, stare at nothing, rest her hands on her belly as if reminding herself that at least one life still depended on her. On the third morning, her phone rang. The sound felt intrusive, almost violent in the stillness. She stared at the screen. Unknown number. Her first instinct was to ignore it. Everyone who mattered was already gone. But something, intuition, maybe, made her answer. "Hello." Her voice was hoarse, unfamiliar even to herself. "Is this Ananya Mehra?" a calm male voice asked on the other end. "Yes," she replied cautiously. "This call is from the legal office of Rosen and Hale International," the man said, his tone professional, controlled. "We request that you come to our office immediately. It concerns your late mother." Ananya's heart skipped a beat. "My mother," she repeated. "Yes, please come as soon as possible." The call ended. Ananya sat frozen, the phone still pressed to her ear long after the line went dead. A law office. Concerning her mother. Her mind raced through possibilities. Unpaid bills, documents, hospital formalities. Nothing else made sense. Her mother had lived quietly, carefully. There were no secrets, at least, none that Ananya knew of. She wrapped a shawl around herself, grabbed her bag, and left. The law office was nothing like she expected. Tall glass doors, marble floors, polished wood walls lined with framed certificates and awards. Everything about the place spoke of power, money, and discretion. This was not where people like her mother belonged. An assistant led Ananya into a private conference room. A man in his late 50s stood up as she entered, gray hair, sharp eyes, calm demeanor. "Mrs. Mehra," he said gently. "Please sit." On the table in front of her lay a thick folder, heavy, official, intimidating. Beside it was a sealed envelope. The moment Ananya saw the handwriting on the envelope, her breath caught in her throat. She knew that handwriting, her mother's. Her hands began to shake uncontrollably. "This letter was left in our custody," the lawyer explained softly, "with instructions to be handed to you only after her passing." Ananya nodded numbly and reached for the envelope. Her fingers trembled as she broke the seal. The room seemed to fade as she unfolded the paper. "My dear Ananya, if you are reading this, I am gone." The words blurred as tears filled her eyes. "There are things I never told you, not because I didn't trust you, but because I wanted to protect you." "Protect me from what?" Ananya wondered desperately. "Your father was not an ordinary man." Her heart began to pound. He built one of the largest private investment empires in Asia. His influence reached across countries, across industries, across governments. Ananya's breathing became shallow. "When he died, I was given a choice, power or peace." She could almost hear her mother's voice now, calm and steady. "I chose silence." Ananya swallowed hard. "I raised you away from wealth so you would grow strong, not entitled. Away from danger, not ambition. I wanted you to live free, not watched." Her mother's words wrapped around her like an embrace she didn't know she needed. "Everything I protected, everything I guarded, now belongs to you." Ananya's hands dropped to her lap. She stared at the letter, unable to process what she had just read. Her father, an empire, none of this matched the life she knew. The lawyer cleared his throat gently, pulling her back into the room. "Mrs. Mehra," he said, sliding the thick folder toward her, "your mother was the sole trustee of an offshore investment network." He opened the folder. Real estate holdings across 3 continents. Private equity shares in multiple multinational corporations. Long-term assets managed discreetly for decades. Ananya stared at the documents, her vision blurring. "Your mother ensured everything was structured to remain invisible," he continued. "No public records, no lifestyle indicators." He paused, then slid a single page forward. "Total inheritance value, $500 million. The number didn't feel real. $500 million. The room began to spin. Her ears rang. Her chest tightened painfully. The walls seemed to close in. Ananya fainted. When she woke up, she was lying on a couch in the same office. A glass of water rested on a side table. The lawyer sat nearby, his expression calm, understanding. "You experienced a shock," he said gently. "Please take your time." Ananya pushed herself up slowly, her mind still foggy. This isn't a mistake," she whispered. He shook his head. "No, Mrs. Mehra, everything has been verified." She stared at the ceiling, tears streaming silently down her temples. Suddenly, everything made sense. Her mother's refusal to accept money from anyone. Her calm confidence in the face of insult. Her silence when Raghav mocked her lack of status. She hadn't been poor. She had been careful. Careful enough to raise a daughter strong enough to survive without money, and wise enough to inherit it without losing herself. The lawyer spoke again, softly. "Congratulations, Mrs. Mehra. You are now one of the wealthiest women in the country." The word congratulations felt strange. There was no joy, no excitement, only clarity. Every insult Raghav had thrown at her, every humiliation, every moment she had been made to feel small, they all came rushing back, and suddenly, they had context. Her mother hadn't been powerless. She had been protecting a legacy. And Ananya realized something profound in that moment. The man who left her at a grave thought he was escaping nothing. In reality, News travels fast when money is involved. Faster than grief, faster than truth, faster than regret. Within days of Ananya's inheritance becoming known to the right people, whispers began to circulate through elite business circles, behind closed doors, over expensive dinners, and inside rooms where loyalty lasted only as long as profit. That night, Raghav sat at a long dining table in a private restaurant, surrounded by men who spoke in confident tones and laughed too loudly. Crystal glasses clinked. Expensive wine flowed freely. It was the kind of place where deals were made casually and ruined just as easily. Raghav tried to focus on the conversation, but his mind drifted. His business was already struggling, and tonight's meeting was important. Then he heard it. "Did you hear?" One man chuckled, swirling his glass. "No, what?" Another replied lazily. "That quiet woman's daughter inherited $500 million. Raghav froze. His fingers tightened around his glass. $500 million, someone repeated. Apparently her mother was sitting on a fortune all these years. The room seemed to tilt. Raghav's glass slipped from his hand, shattering against the floor. Wine spilled across the polished surface like blood. Conversations stopped. "Careful," someone muttered, but Raghav barely heard them. Ananya. His Ananya. His heart began to pound violently as realization crashed into him, heavy, unforgiving. He stood up abruptly, ignoring the stares, grabbed his coat, and walked out. The night air hit his face as he stepped outside, but it didn't calm him. His mind raced, calculating possibilities, replaying memories, re-evaluating every insult, every dismissal, every moment he had looked down on her. Divorce papers. They were already filed, but not finalized. Hope, thin and desperate, crept into his chest. He drove through the city recklessly, gripping the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles turned white. Traffic lights blurred past as his thoughts spiraled. She doesn't know yet, he told himself. She must be confused. She still needs me. That night, he stood outside Ananya's old apartment, the same door he had once walked away from without looking back. He hesitated before knocking. When the door opened, the woman standing before him felt unfamiliar. Ananya looked different, calm, centered, steady. There was a quiet confidence in her posture, a stillness in her eyes that hadn't been there before. Her face glowed softly, and not just from pregnancy. It was something deeper, self-assurance. Pregnancy suited her now. Power did too. "Ananya," Raghav said softly, forcing a gentle tone. "We need to talk." She looked at him without surprise, as if she had expected this moment. Then she smiled, not with warmth, not with forgiveness, but with clarity. "You divorced me at my mother's funeral," she said calmly. "There is nothing left to talk about." The words were controlled, measured, and devastating. "I made a mistake," Raghav blurted out, stepping closer. "I was stressed. I wasn't thinking clearly. Everything happened so fast." She didn't move. "We can fix this," he continued urgently. "We're still married. Think about our child." Ananya placed a hand gently on her belly. The gesture was instinctive, protective. "My child," she corrected quietly, "will never learn abandonment from you." The sentence landed like a final verdict. Raghav felt panic rise in his chest. "I was wrong," he insisted. "I apologize. I'll change. We can start over." She studied his face, really studied it, the same face that had once felt like home. All she saw now was fear. Not regret, not love. Fear. Fear of what he had lost. "You didn't come back because you missed me," she said. "You came back because you heard a number." Raghav clenched his jaw. "That's not fair," he snapped. "No," she replied evenly. "It's accurate." Desperation crept into his voice. "I can protect you," he said. "People will try to take advantage of you. You need someone experienced." She let out a soft, almost amused breath. "I survived you," she said. "I'll survive them." His tone shifted. "You're making a mistake," he warned. "Think carefully." She met his gaze, unflinching. "I already have." Raghav tried everything. Apologies, tears, promises of loyalty, promises of change. When none of it worked, his voice hardened. "You owe me," he said bitterly. I stood by you for years. She laughed quietly, not mockingly, but knowingly. You stood beside me when things were easy, she said. You left when they weren't. Silence filled the space between them. Finally, Ananya stepped back. This conversation is over, she said gently. Please leave. Raghav stood there, stunned. The woman he had left crying beside a grave now stood firm, unshaken. He realized then that something fundamental had shifted. Power, it was no longer his. As he turned away, something inside him broke, not loudly, not dramatically, but permanently. The door closed softly behind him. The sound echoed longer than any shout ever could. The woman he had left broken had returned unbreakable, and the man who once thought he controlled everything was now nothing more than a memory she no longer needed. The divorce was finalized quietly. No courtroom drama, no shouting, no public accusations, just signatures on paper, stamped by a judge who barely knew the story behind them. Ananya didn't ask for alimony. She didn't ask for compensation. She didn't ask for revenge. When her lawyer gently suggested she could demand far more, Ananya shook her head. I don't want anything from him, she said calmly. I just want peace. And for the first time in years, peace felt possible. She left the city where every street held a memory, of arguments, of hospital nights, of promises broken. She moved somewhere new, where no one knew her past, where her name meant nothing yet. There, she rebuilt her life slowly, carefully, with intention. Using her inheritance, Ananya did not buy mansions or luxury cars. She didn't surround herself with people who suddenly called her important. She remembered her mother's lessons: silence, dignity, purpose. She started a foundation in her mother's name. At first, it was small. One school scholarship, one medical camp, one donated classroom. But it grew. She funded education for underprivileged girls, not just tuition, but books, uniforms, meals, and safe transportation. She believed education wasn't a gift, it was a right. She built hospitals in areas where women had once given birth without doctors, where children died from illnesses that could have been treated easily, where families had learned to accept loss because help was too far away. She created opportunities quietly. No press releases, no interviews, no speeches. She refused awards, declined invitations, redirected attention back to the causes instead of herself. To the world, she was invisible. To those she helped, she was everything. And in that silence, Ananya found strength she never knew she had. Motherhood transformed her further. Her daughter became the center of her universe, a reminder of resilience, of second chances, of the life that continued despite everything that had been taken away. Ananya raised her child with honesty and warmth, teaching her kindness without weakness, confidence without arrogance. She never spoke bitterly about Raghav. He made choices, she would say simply. So did I. Meanwhile, Raghav's world was falling apart. At first, it was subtle. A delayed investment, a meeting cancelled without explanation, a phone call not returned. Then it became obvious. Investors began pulling out. Partners distanced themselves. Deals fell through at the last minute. People talk, and people remember. Word spread quickly, not just about his failed marriage, but about the way he had handled it. The story followed him everywhere. The man who divorced his pregnant wife at her mother's funeral. No amount of justification erased that image. Trust, once broken, doesn't repair itself. Reputation, once lost, doesn't return. His business collapsed completely. The offices emptied. The phones stopped ringing. The respect he once commanded vanished overnight. Those who had laughed beside him at expensive dinners no longer recognized his calls. He tried to rebuild, tried to explain, tried to blame stress, circumstances, misunderstanding. But excuses don't rebuild character. Years passed. One afternoon, sitting alone in a small cafe, Raghav flipped through a magazine absent-mindedly. He wasn't looking for anything in particular. Then he froze. There she was, Ananya, on the cover, calm, poised, powerful. The headline read, The silent billionaire who chose dignity over revenge. His chest tightened. He read the article slowly. It spoke of a woman who had transformed grief into purpose, who had built hospitals instead of headlines, who had uplifted thousands without ever raising her voice. There was no mention of him. Not a single word. That hurt more than blame ever could. In that moment, Raghav understood something that had taken him years too long to grasp. He hadn't just lost money. He had lost character, because he chose convenience over compassion. He had lost legacy, because he walked away instead of standing firm. He had lost respect, because dignity cannot be bought, only earned. Ananya had won without fighting, without shouting, without destroying him. She had simply lived well. And sometimes, that is the most powerful justice of all. The cemetery looked different after all these years. The trees had grown taller. The paths were cleaner. The silence felt softer, no longer heavy with shock, but layered with acceptance. Time had passed, seasons had changed, and life had continued, even when it once felt impossible. Ananya stood quietly at her mother's grave, the morning sun filtering through the leaves above. The air was calm, warm, and still. Birds chirped in the distance, their sounds gentle and unhurried. Beside her stood a little girl, no more than 6 years old, holding Ananya's hand with innocent trust. Her daughter's fingers were small, warm, and firm, a reminder that something beautiful had grown out of unimaginable pain. Ananya knelt slowly, brushing a few fallen leaves away from the gravestone. She traced her mother's name gently, her touch reverent, familiar. "Thank you, Mom," she whispered. Her voice didn't shake this time. Not for the money, not for the inheritance that had changed her life, but for the strength her mother had taught her long before wealth ever entered the picture. Strength to stay silent when ego demanded noise. Strength to walk away when pride demanded revenge. Strength to endure without becoming bitter. Ananya closed her eyes for a moment, letting memories surface, hospital corridors, whispered prayers, tired smiles, lessons given without words. Her mother had never taught her how to be rich. She had taught her how to be whole. The little girl looked up at her curiously. "Mommy," she asked softly, "who is she?" Ananya smiled gently. "She's the bravest woman I ever knew," she replied. "And the reason we're standing here today." The child nodded, satisfied, and placed a small flower near the grave. Ananya felt her chest tighten, not with pain, but with gratitude. She stood, holding her daughter close, and looked around. So many lives intersected in this quiet place, so many stories of love, loss, regret, and resilience. And she thought of Raghav, not with anger, not with hatred, but with understanding. Some people lose gold chasing ego. They believe power is loud, dominance is strength, and control is victory. Some lose diamonds chasing pride. They mistake arrogance for confidence, and superiority for worth. And some men lose everything, not because they were unlucky, not because life was unfair, but because they never learned how to stand beside a woman in her weakest moment. They never learned that love is not tested in success, but in struggle. That loyalty is proven in grief, not celebration. If he had waited, if he had respected grief instead of exploiting it, if he had chosen humanity over arrogance, his life would have been different. He might have raised his child. He might have built something meaningful. He might have been remembered kindly. But life doesn't reward cruelty. It reveals it. Cruelty exposes character. Cruelty leaves fingerprints on reputation. Cruelty returns quietly, not with punishment, but with absence. Ananya had learned that justice doesn't always arrive in courtrooms. Sometimes it arrives in peace. In waking up without fear. In raising a child without bitterness. In knowing you did not become what hurt you. She squeezed her daughter's hand gently. "Come," she said softly. "Let's go." As they walked away, the sun rose higher, casting long shadows behind them, shadows that grew shorter with each step forward. Ananya didn't look back. She had already learned the lesson the world so often forgets. True power is not in wealth. True victory is not in revenge. True strength is in choosing dignity. even when no one is watching. And that strength is the richest inheritance of all.